So, good afternoon and welcome to Leadership for Lunch. Today's topic is about strategic thinking. But before we get there, if you haven't already and you'd like to get a weekly reminder of the sessions and also access to the recording afterwards, then you can sign up and receive regular emails from me. So I'll just pop that in the chat box so that you can sign up for that if you want to. There we go. Okay. A little bit about me, for those of you that don't know me well. I'm basically a psychologist. That was my degree. I've been working in leadership development and executive coaching for getting on for 30 years now. So I do feel like I've kind of got plenty of experience to draw on. I do most of my work in the technology sector. So a lot of my clients, it's kind of CIOs, CTOs, people like that, and the teams that report to them. And I'm also master trainer of NLP. I'm the founder of Brilliant Minds and also of Leadership for Lunch. If you'd like to have a chat with me about your own situation, if you've got something going on in your team where you'd like to have a conversation, then very, very happy to do that. Again, I will put a link in the chat box so that you can get access to my calendar and sign up. So just add that in there. It's not quite what I intended to do. Let's try that again. There we go. That looks more like it, yes. So, strategic thinking. Those of you who've been with us before, I'm in the purpose quadrant of the leadership model. Let me just share my screen and show you the slides of that. Sorry, it's just taking a little bit longer than it should. Right, here we go. Let me share that with you. Right. Yes, this is the right day, 10th of March. There we go. So the leadership model that we looked at in the first week and also revisited last week, strategic thinking comes under the heading of purpose. So purpose is derived from good quality goal setting and clear strategy. So today we're going to look at strategic thinking. And it's one of those things that a lot of people talk about. It's often something where I've had people come for coaching when they're looking to go up a level in their career. Often they've been told you need to become more strategic. You need to think more strategically. And often then the question is, okay, what does that actually mean? So let's start with what strategy means. Now, I think I said to you before, I like definitions. And I had a science background, and in my early years, I was a competitive debater. So, nailing down what you mean by your terms is always really important to me. So for me, strategy is really, really simple. It's about saying, well, okay, where are we and where do we want to be? And then the gap between those two, becomes clear. And the strategy is what gets you from where you want to be, from where you are to where you want to be. Strategy is actually no more complicated than that, although often people make it very, very complicated. Often as well with strategy, people tend to kind of use the idea of strategic thinking as the opposite of detailed thinking. So again, people come to me and they say, I've got to learn to think more strategically, and to get my next promotion, I've been told I've got to become more strategic. I think, okay, that means leaving behind all the detail, and that people talk about, getting out of the weeds and that kind of thing. As far as I'm concerned, though, it's not, strategic thinking is not always about a lack of detail. Yes, you want clarity of overarching principles, but some of the people I've worked with who have really, really good strategic thinking and hence a good strategy, their strategy is more like a sort of 5,000-piece jigsaw. There's tons of detail in it. The picture it creates, though, is very, very clear. So I've looked at lots of different aspects of strategic thinking, and I actually think that it has a lot in common with most everyday thinking. It's more about being clear about the purpose of your thinking. Is what are we wanting to achieve here? And strategic thinking really implies that we're talking about going on a journey, something that isn't straightforward, something maybe we haven't done before that we need to think through carefully. And also, it's often in a situation where there can be multiple consequences of whatever actions we take. So one of the models that I came across that I really like comes from the work of Dr. Jan Leeke. And Dr. Leeke came up with this model and said that there are numerous different elements that make up strategic thinking. And these five kind of, encompass everything that she feels is important in this arena. So I'm just going to go through each one of these, and apologies for the rather wordy slides. I just felt that her own words were better than anything I could paraphrase them into. So the idea of a system perspective is that rather than seeing things in isolation, is taking account of the fact that nearly everything is part of a system. And those of you that have done some NLP, be familiar with the neurological levels and that notion that beyond the self, there is the sense of self as being part of something greater. So when we take a system perspective, what we're really looking at, especially in the business world, is we're thinking about what's the value creation chain. So how does one thing impact on the next thing? How does one thing trigger something else? And looking at the interdependencies between all those different things. So Leeke says, a strategic thinker has a mental model of the complete system of value creation from beginning to end and understands the interdependencies within the chain. And the benefit of that is that it enables the individual to see their role within the larger system and also the impact of their actions on other parts of the system, as well as being able to see the final outcome. So this is really, I would say this is a kind of zoom out. So rather than just looking at your part in something, is you zoom out and look at the whole system. So that's the first element of strategic thinking. The second one then is about intent. So there's a real sort of, not just why are we doing this, but how do we stay focused on it? Because strategic intent enables people to stay focused, to marshal their energy and focus their attention, to, screen out the distractions and stay with it long enough to achieve the goal. I'm sure you've all had experiences of having created a goal, created a plan, and it's all pretty clear, but then other things take over. Was it John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And I think for a lot of large organizations now, this is a huge challenge because in most organizations, there's so much going on and so many opportunities to get involved in different things that actually keeping your focus long enough to achieve your goal is a real challenge. So if we're not clear about the intent, then we're never going to get anywhere. So strategic thinking really is shaped by the overarching intention of why are we doing this, and how are we going to stay focused on it. So she says, strategic intent provides the focus that allows individuals within an organization to marshal and leverage their energy, to focus attention, to resist distraction, and to concentrate for as long as it takes to achieve a goal. In the disorienting swirl of change, I love that phrase, isn't that great? In the disorienting swirl of change, such psychic energy may well be the scarcest resource an organization has, and only those who utilize it will succeed. Therefore, strategic thinking is fundamentally concerned with and driven by the continuous shaping and reshaping of intent. So she's recognizing here that we might start off with a certain intent, and yet as the situation evolves, as we make progress, sometimes we have to stand back and reevaluate and maybe change course very slightly, or sometimes in a big way. The third element of strategic thinking is intelligent opportunism. So you remember SWOT analysis. I'm sure you've all done that at some point in your career. People thinking strategically are constantly revisiting the SWOT analysis. So they're always looking for new opportunities and responding to them. They understand the fact that nothing stands still, the world's dynamic. And also the idea of intelligent opportunism implies that you don't assume you have all the answers, that you, as she says, dig deep into your organization, that you ask for opinions from lots of people, because ideas are knowledgeable, sorry, ideas and knowledge are valuable wherever they exist. Sometimes it's the person who's most close to the customer who can give you the real insight that you need when you're making a choice between two courses of action. Sometimes it's people who are dealing with complaints who can tell you the real issues in your organization. Sometimes it's people who've just been around a long time, but not necessarily climbed up the career ladder, who can give you a kind of system perspective on things because they've seen things happen over a period of time. And that brings us into the fourth element, which is thinking in time. Or actually, with my NLP head on, I might say this is more about thinking through time. But because Linka says that strategy is not solely driven by the future, but the gap between the current reality and the intent for the future. And in order to do that, you have to connect it up with the past so that you're seeing that continuous flow of events from the past through the present into the future. We need to learn from the past and bring with us those lessons, but not be held back by the past. And that in itself, can be a challenge for some organizations. Having myself worked in an organization that was 70 years old when I joined it, I've experienced firsthand the weight of history and the weight of tradition on an organization that's desperately trying to change and needs to respond to pressures in its environment, but just can't quite shake off the shackles of the past. So really clear strategic thinking takes account of both the past, the present, and the future. I love this. Having seen the future that we want to create, what must we keep from our past, lose from that past, and create in the present to get there? Great quote. And that's a question that a lot of us would benefit from asking ourselves on a regular basis. And then the fifth piece of Linka's elements of strategic thinking is that she says that strategic thinking should be hypothesis driven. So drawing on the scientific method, dealing with generating a hypothesis and then testing it. So we want to achieve X, and how do we think is the best way to do that? So we come up with a plan, we test it out, and then we check whether or not it's working. Because it's hypothesis driven, then that means that strategic thinking avoids that thing of having to be right, of having to have all the answers, but it also gives some shape to it rather than just sort of, what do we think and let's give it a go. It gives it some more kind of structure and the opportunity then to learn and to evolve a strategy rather than saying, it's got to be right first time. It was this little piece at the end of the section on the hypothesis-driven element that really caught my attention. Because she says strategic thinking is both critical and creative in nature, and figuring out how to accomplish both types of thinking simultaneously has long troubled cognitive psychologists, since it's necessary to suspend critical judgment in order to think more creatively. And a little light bulb went off in the back of my mind, and I thought, I know how to do that. And with my NLP head on, rather than my psychologist head, although the two things are very closely related, there is a wonderful NLP technique to do with strategic thinking that I want to share with you. Let me stop sharing my screen. So one of the central tenets of NLP has to do with modeling. And really, most of what we call NLP came from this idea of modeling, of looking at someone doing something exceptionally well and distilling the essence of their thought process and their behavior so that you could replicate their performance. So a great deal of what we call NLP was modeled from people who had a natural talent for something. So lots and lots of different applications of this. When we do the NLP Master Practitioner Program, people do their own projects, and we've had people model a huge diversity of things. One of my favorite ones was a lady who modeled how to resist temptation in the form of food. Had to do with a lifestyle of spending a lot of time traveling and always finding yourself in a train station or an airport at dinner time and having your nostrils filled with the scent of all sorts of junk food. She said, I just need to kind of, stay focused on my healthy eating habits rather than being drawn into eating, I don't know, cookies or pasties or whatever it was that was on offer. Also had people model things like how to take in verbal directions and then find your way to a place. That was sort of before everybody had sat nav as a matter of course in their cars. So lots of different things that you can do with that. And one of my great mentors in the world of NLP, Robert Dilts. Robert wrote a series of books called Strategies of Genius, where he went back through the published work of a lot of genius thinkers from history and did a kind of modeling exercise on that. So what can we learn from these people that we can bring into our everyday lives? And one of the people who fell under that microscope was Walt Disney, one of the great creative geniuses of the 20th century. Now, I haven't read a great deal about Disney. I know there's lots of biographies and so on, but the bits I have read, I've come across people saying that he was someone who was very unpredictable. And employees would say, you go into a meeting and you were never quite sure which Walt Disney you were going to get that day, because he had the ability to think in lots of different ways. And out of this came in NLP, the Disney creativity strategy. Now, I've got this for you on a handout. If I put the link into the chat box, you can actually download this and have a look at it while we're talking. There you go. You should be able to download that PDF and have a look at it. So the Disney creativity strategy identifies 3 different elements to creative and strategic thinking. There's the dreamer, which is this type of thinking that, as it sounds, puts forward the vision. The dreamer who comes up with, what if we did this? What a great idea that would be. And then one of my favorite stories about Walt Disney was actually a quote from his son, that when the first Disneyland in Anaheim was opened, it actually opened after Walt Disney's death. And a big, grand opening ceremony, all the press were there, and a journalist interviewing Walt Disney's son and said to him, what a shame that your father wasn't here to see this. Walt Disney's son replied, yeah, it's here because he saw it. Yeah? And that's the definition of vision as far as I'm concerned, to be able to see something so clearly that you can turn it into reality. So the dreamer is the type of thinking that puts forward the vision, that dreams the dream, that imagines how wonderful something would be if only we could make it happen. The second role then is the realist. And the realist is the thinking process that says, how can we actually make that happen? So they turn it into concrete ideas, into facts and figures, into processes, into numbers, if you like. And then the third element to this process is the critic. And the critic is the person who says, and we all know one of these, don't we? The person who goes, that's not going to work because. Now, often what happens is that in a business meeting, you might have somebody who dreams the dream, and you might have people who can turn it into reality. Sometimes when the critic creeps in and the person starts telling you why this is not going to work, the dreamer gives up. But if we recognize that all 3 types of thinking are valuable and that put together, they actually enable us to bridge that gap that Dr. Leaker identified between the analytical and the creative thinking, if we recognize that and we give space for each of these 3 different sorts of thinking, then we're really on the track to creating powerful strategy. So have you got your handout? Should look like this. Yeah. Now, this is quite difficult to demonstrate online, but I'm going to do my best. So the diagram that you've got here, this is a kind of bird's eye view looking down on space, because with this process, what we do is we assign each of those 3 roles to its own space on the floor. And we do this standing up and walking around. In common with some other NLP techniques, this is really helpful because it quite literally gives you the opportunity to see something from a different point of view. And the moving around and the sort of giving each type of thinking its space also helps your mind to separate out the 3 different roles. So as best I can, let me show you how this works. So if I'm going to stand here and be the dreamer, so I'm going to find my spot and literally just dream the dream. Think, what if I could do that? How wonderful would that be? Think about all the positive benefits of it and immerse myself in the pleasure of my idea. And that's the first couple of steps. And then having done that, then I'm going to go to the realist spot, which is probably sort of over here. And in the realist spot, I kind of think about that dream, go, okay, what does that mean in real terms? So if I'm going to make that happen, how much time is it going to take? Who else do I need to be involved? What questions do I need to ask myself and answer? How much money is it going to cost? And all those sort of pragmatic, practical questions that might turn the dream into something more tangible and more realistic, if you like. Having done that, then I'm going to go over to this spot, which is the critic. And then we do okay, why isn't it going to work? Yeah. So this can be quite difficult to do when it's your dream. So that's another reason for having the detachment is literally to stand back and look at that original dream. Say to yourself, okay, so what am I missing? What could possibly go wrong? What would be the reasons for not doing it? And whatever comes out, comes out. Just let it all flow. Now, this is where in a lot of meetings I said it all stops because the person who had the dream is upset by the fact that somebody's criticised it. And so they go, won't do it. But no, when you're doing this on your own, what you do then is you come back to where you originally had the dream. You come back to your dreamer spot. And taking into account everything you got from these two positions, you bring it all together and you dream the dream again. Just adjusting it so that it's a bit more concrete, a bit more tangible, takes account of the things that the critic said to you, but not letting go of the original motivation and impetus. And then you just cycle round. So, you go back over here, you come back over here, and keep going round the loop until such time as you have a dream that can be described as a concrete goal and that you can make a plan to actually achieve it. Does that make sense? Does anybody want to ask me any questions about that? I mean, I've gone through that really quickly. Good, I'm getting some nodding heads. Okay. Yeah, Bruce.
I suppose one question I have, Diane, is that
Mhm.
given you said that Disney was quite a difficult character,
Mhm.
is it not possible that one of the things that happened with him was when he was in a dreamer state, so say the dreamer Disney turns up,
Yeah.
that he actually could not associate out of the dreamer state into the other states because he was so associated into that. All of the important chunks of information which were necessary in order for him to dream that dream
Mhm.
were necessary for him to stay in that state and drive the meeting, I guess, as it was.
Yes. Yeah. That
And
would
so,
definitely make sense. Yeah, absolutely. And that might be why people found him quite challenging to work with, because he would be different from day to day.
sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
And one day you're being encouraged to dream the dream, and then the next day you're being told to, turn it into a spreadsheet.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So when it comes to strategic thinking in organizations, there's a number of ways you can use this. You can do it for yourself. I use this in my own thinking and planning for my business. I use it sometimes if I get a bit stuck planning something and I need to sort of disentangle the thought process. You can also use it with a team. And there's two different ways you can do that. So you can either have everybody do all three pieces. So you start and you say, right, we're going to dream the dream, and you get everybody to contribute their thoughts about this wonderful end result that you're aiming for. And then you have everybody do realist and get people to turn that into some kind of concrete process. And everybody does critic. Or you can split the room up and you can either, divide people by, what comes naturally to them. So the people who are quite visionary anyway, have them do the dreaming bit. The people who are good at spreadsheets, have them do the realist bit. The people who can always tell you what's going to go wrong, the risk experts, you give them the critic role. And then you go around the room and each section of the team does its own thing. And here's the really smart bit about that, is that having done it once, you then get people to go and be in a different group and experience a different aspect of the process. So that people are not just doing the thing that they know they're good at, they're also kind of increasing their bandwidth a bit and having a go at doing something that might come a bit less naturally to them. So two different ways there that you can use this. And you know, if you do give it a go, I'd really love to get some feedback from you about how that works and what you come up with. That was a bit of a quick romp through strategic thinking. I'm looking at the clock. I'm going, I've got 2 minutes. That's really good. Yeah. So, anybody got any questions? Anything you want to ask me about the process or anything about strategic thinking in general? Have I shell shocked you all a bit?
I can just add a couple of comments. I'm an NLPer, and the model exercise I did was with Greg Searle. I can remember this is some 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had to model the state he gets in for his rowing. And I remember to this day that he wears lucky socks. So actually, that was a really good analogy for me. But taking it into what you just described of individuals in a team, I love those two different ideas of either each person individually becoming the dreamer, the realist, and the critic. But I love the change of position so that even though I might be the dreamer, I've then got to stand in the critic. And just very briefly, I've just recently launched a new program, and I've had to do all those elements. I'm currently at the critic side. It's had its founder launch, and it's about to it's having now, I've revisiting it and making some changes. So I've now got to be the critic to work out what needs to change for the future. So I thought that illustration was really very effective. Thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you for sharing your experiences. Well, that's great. Anything else? Oh. Okay. Angela, are you still with us?
I am, thank you. It's been really, really useful, and I'm a reflector by nature. It's got me thinking, and I'm already doing the traditional thing and pigeonholing individuals in my team into those roles and thinking about how I can develop them further.
Yeah.
Appraisal time's coming up, so it's gonna give me some interesting conversations and things to think about, I think. So thank you.
Excellent. My pleasure. Yes. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, when you start thinking about it, that we do instinctively know which one of these roles is going to come most naturally to a lot of the people that we work with. And you know, this can also be useful because, for example, in your situation, Gillian, where you're doing it all on your own, sometimes it can be helpful to go and enlist a little bit of input from somebody who has a talent in one of those areas. You know, so if you know, for example, that you know the spreadsheets are not really your forte, and you know turning the idea into something more concrete is more difficult for you, you could find somebody who's good at that and get them to come and help you out. So you can almost have like a mentor for each of those three types of thinking that might just enhance your own skills. Okay, so we're almost at the end of today's session. Next week, we're going to move around the model into the congruence area. And I'm going to look at how to work on yourself. This is one of the things I often say to people when they ask me, how do I become a better leader? And I often say, work on yourself. So we're going to look at some processes for reflection, how you can build your self-awareness and start to address some of those things that might be getting in the way of you being the best leader that you can possibly be. So I look forward to seeing you again next week.